Good morning, everyone. In the last session, we understood how to handle exceptions in the REST API. In today's session, we are going to learn how to deal with XML data in the REST API. As of now, we are consuming JSON data and we are producing JSON data. For example, I want to develop one REST API which supports both XML data and JSON data because XML and JSON both are interoperable. In earlier days, people used to work with the XML to send the data and to receive the data. Nowadays, people are using JSON data. Suppose I have a requirement that I'm going to develop one REST API. So that means I'm going to develop one provider application. For this provider, there are two consumers available. So assume that this is consumer 1. This consumer 1 is interested to communicate with this provider by using XML data as a mediator. So they will send XML as an input and they will expect XML as an output. Similarly, we have another consumer, that is consumer 2. Another consumer 2. This consumer 2 is expecting JSON data as an input and it is providing JSON data as an output. JSON is going as an input and JSON is coming as an output. So as of now, we developed a REST API which supports only XML as an input and we developed as of now JSON as an input and JSON as an output. But now, suppose if you have a requirement, our REST API should support for both XML data as well as JSON data, then how do we do that? Okay, so as we discussed, in order to work with the JSON data, internally, our Spring Boot is using Jackson API. Okay. Jackson API is a third-party API. Spring Boot internally using this Jackson API to convert our Java object to JSON, JSON data to Java object. Similarly, in order to work with XML data in the Java applications, we are going to use JAX-B API. Up to JDK 1.8, JAX-B is a part of the JDK, but from Java 1.9 onwards, that JAX-B is removed from the JDK. We need to add that dependency explicitly. To work with the JSON data, we are going to use Jackson API. To work with the XML data, we are going to use JAX-B API. So now let me create one REST API which supports both JSON data as an input and output. Similarly, XML as input and output. So JSON and XML both are interoperable. Interoperable nothing but they will be supported by multiple technologies and multiple platforms. So both parties, the consumer and provider, can understand XML and JSON data. To work with the JSON data in the Java applications, we are going to use Jackson API. To work with XML data in the Java application, we are going to use JAX-B API. Are you guys able to understand this? Now, let me create one simple REST API which supports for XML as well as JSON. Okay, good. File, new, Spring Starter project. Let me create one simple REST API here. Spring Boot REST API. I'm going to use Maven as a build tool. Java 17, group ID, something like in.ashok IT, package name in.ashok, packaging type jar, language is Java. Click on next, Spring Boot version. Let me add web starter. So we want to create a REST controller. To create the REST controller, we will be using web starter. Next and finish. In order to work with JAX-B, we no need to add any extra dependency, guys. If you want to work with JAX-B, then you need to add a dependency. For JSON data, dependency is not required because when you add web starter, Jackson API will be coming by default. If you see the Maven dependencies, you see already we got the Jackson data binding. That means the Jackson API is already available in the build path. So we have not selected the Jackson dependency, but how come Jackson dependency is coming? When you add web starter, by default, Jackson dependency will be coming. See here, we selected only web starter. With the web starter, we are getting that Jackson dependency, but which is used to work with the JSON data in the Java applications. All right. Now let me simply create one REST API, new class. Let me take one book class. It is a binding class. Book class, which is a binding class. Inside this book class, I'm going to take some name and price, private integer book ID, private string book name, private double book price. 3 variables I'm taking. Let me write one constructor, parameterized constructor. Okay. Setters and getters available. 0 param constructor is available, and a constructor with some fields also available. Got it. So book class is available. Now let me create one REST controller to expose this book REST controller. Now inside this, I will write one method. So at the rate REST controller, let's write one simple method which will give book data. Public book object get book. A simple method I'm writing. Let us create one book with some dummy data. Book is equal to new book, ID some 101, name and price, some value. Okay, then return that book object. So let us go to get mapping at the rate get mapping /book. That's it. So we have a REST controller. And we can start this application and we can access this REST API. Run as boot application. We can test it by using Postman, or we can test it by using browser also, because it is a GET request. You can send the request from the browser as well. Localhost :8080/book. Now you see the data is coming in the JSON format. Am I writing the logic to convert object to JSON, or boot is taking care of that, guys? I have a method. My method is returning a book object. But when I send the request from the browser, am I getting the object here, or I'm getting the JSON data here? I'm getting the JSON data here. So my method is returning a object, but I'm getting JSON data. So who is converting that Java object to JSON data? That Java object is converted to JSON using Jackson API. So internally, this Spring Boot is using Jackson API. Method is returning a object, but that object is not coming as a response. The response is coming in the JSON format. That means that object is converted to JSON. Format. Are you guys able to understand this one? So are we writing any extra logic to convert our Java object to JSON? No, that is internal logic. Now here the thing is, my provider can have multiple consumers. First consumer want to deal with JSON data. One consumer want to deal with JSON data, another consumer want to deal with only XML data. So my provider should give response to consumers in the different formats. One consumer is expecting the response in the JSON format, another consumer expecting the response in the XML format. But currently our API is supporting for how many formats, guys? What is the default format we are getting now? What is the default format we are getting now? The default format we are getting as JSON. Internally in the Spring Boot, Jackson API is used. With that Jackson API, we are getting JSON data as a response. But two consumers want two different types of responses. One consumer want JSON response, another consumer want XML response. So now here first thing, how provider will understand consumer is expecting the response in which format? That is the first question. So I'm a provider, I'm having two consumers. One consumer is expecting the response in the JSON format, another consumer expecting the response in the XML format. How provider will know that one consumer is expecting the JSON response, another consumer is expecting the XML response? That's where when consumer is sending a request to the provider, consumer should send some header that is called accept header. So in which format consumer is expecting the response, in which format consumer is expecting the response, for that consumer should send accept header to the provider. How to send that accept header? Observe here. Go to headers section. Here accept header is available. Here we need to specify accept header. We need to specify get request. We need to specify accept. Accept is equal to application/JSON. Send the request. Okay, not acceptable. Get request. Hidden is available. Accept. Hide the generated headers. Now let's generate accept is equal to in which format application/JSON. Right. So when the consumer, observe carefully, guys. Consumer sending a request to the provider. When consumer sending request to the provider, consumer should send one header which is called accept. What is the meaning of this accept header? Accept header will represent consumer expecting the response in which format. Consumer expecting the response in which format? Consumer expecting the response in the JSON format. Okay. So how consumer will tell to provider that I want JSON? Accept application/JSON. So I'm sending a get request with the accept as a JSON format. That means, hey provider, you process my request and you send me the response in the JSON format. That is the meaning of that. Hey provider, you process my request and you send me the response in the JSON format. That is the meaning of this request. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is the meaning of accept header? Accept header is used to specify. Accept header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from provider. You got my point? What accept HTTP header? Accept HTTP header. So what is the purpose of this accept header? Accept header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. For example, I'm expecting the response in the JSON format, application/JSON. Suppose if I'm expecting the response in the XML format, then I will specify accept is equal to application slash XML. Are you guys able to follow me? What is accept header? Accept header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. Accept is equal to application slash JSON. Accept is equal to application slash XML. So accept is equal to application slash JSON, nothing but consumer is expecting the response in the JSON format. Accept is equal to application slash XML, nothing but consumer is expecting the response in the XML format. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is the meaning of accept header? Consumer should send this header in the request so that provider will understand in which format consumer expecting the response. So now suppose if I send accept is equal to application slash JSON. Now I'm getting the response in the JSON format because Spring Boot internally using Jackson API. With that Jackson API, it is converting this Java object to JSON and it is sending JSON data as a output. Now, for example, now, if you send accept is equal to application slash XML. If I send application slash XML, now, am I getting the response in the XML format or I'm not getting the response in the XML format? Guys, am I getting the response in the XML format? I'm not getting the response in the XML format. I'm not getting the response in the XML format. Okay. What is the reason? Why we are not getting the response in the XML format? Why we are not getting the response in the XML format? The reason is to work with the XML format, we need JAX-B API. So we currently in our project, earlier up to Java 1.8 version, JAX-B is part of JDK. So up to Java 1.8 version, JAX-B is part of JDK. But from Java 9 onwards, JAX-B is removed from the JDK. If you want JAX-B, we need to add the dependency. So currently in our project, JAX-B API is not available. So that's why our application not able to convert that book object to book XML. But if I send JSON, I'm able to get the response. The reason Jackson API is available in the project. But when I send accept is equal to application slash XML, I'm not getting the response. So the reason in our project, JAX-B API is not available. Are you guys able to understand what is Jackson API and what is JAX-B API? Jackson API is used to convert Java object to JSON and JSON to Java. Java object to JSON and JSON to Java. Java object to JSON and JSON to Java. Guys, look at this exception, what we are getting here. What is the status code we are getting? When I am asking XML response, what is the status code we are getting? We are getting the status code as 406. What is the message we are getting? What is the status code we are getting? 406, not acceptable. Fine guys. So which API is used to work with XML data? Which API is used to work with XML data? In order to work with XML data, we need to use JAXB API. Got my point? In order to work with XML data, we are going to use JAXB API. Okay, so fine. To work with that XML data, JAXB API, so this is the dependency that we need to add. Go to pom.xml, our project. Let me add this dependency in our pom.xml. This is extra dependency that we are using to work with XML. Got it? Fine. I have added this XML dependency in the project. Let us restart our application now. Refresh. Right click, run as boot application. Clear the console. Now book, send the request. Now guys, see, after adding the dependency, are we able to get that response? After adding the dependency, are we able to get the response in the XML format? Now, so if you send accept is equal to application/JSON, then we are getting response in the JSON format. If you give accept is equal to application/XML, then we will get the response in the XML format. So are we able to support multiple response formats based on the consumer interest? Consumer can select XML as a response type, or consumer can select JSON as a response type. So if you want to deal with the JSON data, you no need to do anything, because JSON is used by default in the Spring Boot when you are using WebStarter. If you want to work with XML, then you need to add this dependency extra. Okay, JSON data format XML is available. Now, once you add this dependency, if you send accept is application/XML, then the Java object is converted to XML format, and we are getting XML as a response. Are you able to follow me? Guys, are you able to follow me? How to deal with XML data? Now, so if you want to specify in which format this is producing the response, now you can represent that in our method as well, value. Okay, so here you can specify producers is equal to two formats, right? It supports application/XML and it supports application/JSON. You can represent like this. So when someone look at this method, then they will understand that. So this get mapping, this is mapped to /book URL pattern, and this method can produce XML data as the output, and this method can produce JSON data as the output. So now when it will give XML as a response, when it will give JSON as a response. So it depends upon consumer request. When consumer is sending a request, consumer will send one accept header. Accept is equal to application/XML. That means consumer is sending a request to the provider with the accept as XML data. Then provider will process the consumer request, will send XML as a output. If you send accept is equal to application slash JSON, then provider will give the response in the JSON format. Now, so my provider is having two consumers. One consumer is expecting XML data. Another consumer is expecting JSON data. My provider can support for both formats. My provider can support for both formats. Now, this request we are sending from the Postman with the header. We can't send it from the browser because in the browser, we can't send the headers. In the browser, you can't send the headers. In the browser, directly you can send a request without any header. So if you send the request from the browser, by default, it is giving XML response. So do we have any option to send the header in the browser? No, we don't have any option to send the header in the browser. So that's why I'm sending that request from the Postman by using this header. So accept a header. So can you tell me what is the purpose of this accept a header? Accept a header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. Accept is equal to application slash JSON or accept is equal to application slash XML. Now, similarly, if you want to write one post request method, then how do we do that? Public string add book. So I'm expecting book object as a input. System.out.println of book. Return book added. So if I want to save some book data, then I will write one post request method here, logic to save in DB. So let me write this method as a post mapping method. Post mapping value is equal to slash book. So I'm writing value for this one. Post mapping value is equal to slash book, comma, consumes is equal to. So this method is going to consume either XML data it can consume, and this method can consume JSON data also. What about produces? This method is producing string value nothing but text slash plain. Okay, so this is my post request method. So for this method, we are using post mapping. Post request method, which is using post mapping, value is equal to slash book, consumes application slash XML, application slash JSON, and producing plain text data. Public string add book, we are giving book object as an input. So how this book object will come? So the data will come in the request body. How do we capture the data from the request body? So by using @request body annotation, we are going to capture this one. By using @request body annotation, we are going to capture this one. Post mapping and get map. Are you guys clear with my point? So here it is producing get request method producing the data in the XML or JSON format. Here it is consuming the data in the XML or JSON format. So what is the difference between produces and consumes? What is the difference between produces and consumes? Produces represents in which format that method can produce the response. So here produces is equal to application slash XML, application slash JSON. That means this method can produce the data either in XML or in JSON format. This method can produce the data in the both XML and JSON format. This method can produce the data in the both XML and JSON format. consumes. This method can consume the data in the both XML and JSON format. This method can consume the data in the both XML and JSON format. Now, how do we send a post request for this method? Okay, let's observe. Run as boot application. And I'm printing the book. ToString should be there to check whether data is really coming into our object or not. I'm adding ToString method. Clear the console. Yes. In our REST controller, we are having one post request method and we are having one get request method. So go to post request method. Let me take XML data. Post request method /book. Now we can't send accept now because it is producing text data. So let me go for body, send the raw data in the JSON format or XML format. Raw data in the XML format. So when we are sending the data in the body, there will be one header which is called content type. Okay, so there will be one header called content type header will be available. So what is the meaning of content type header? Content type header will represent in which format we are sending data in the body, in the request body, in which format we are sending. So go to our console. I'm sending a post request method. Send the request, book is added. Now you see the data is converted to object. So we are sending the data in the XML format. That data is converted to object format. So now for this provider, input can be sent in the XML format as well as in the JSON format. So this API can take input as a XML or JSON. This post request method can take input as XML or JSON. How it will understand in which format input is coming. So when consumer is sending the input, there will be one header called content type header will be available. Content type header will represent input to data format. Accept header will represent output data format. Both are opposite guys. Content type and accept. So what is content type header? Content type HTTP header. Okay. It represents in which format consumer sending data to provider in request body. Okay. Accept header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. Content type header represents in which format consumer sending data to provider in the request body. For example, so if you specify content type header is equal to application/XML, or we can specify content type is equal to application/JSON. Accept is available, content type is available. Accept is used to specify in which format we are expecting the response. Content type represents in which format we are sending the data. In which format we are sending the data. Are you guys able to understand? What is the difference between accept header and the content type header? Content type HTTP header and accept HTTP header. Read these things. Guys, I'm getting one call. I will be back in 2 minutes. So just read these points. Right, guys? Able to understand what is the difference between accept header and the content type header? So when consumer is sending a request, if consumer is sending some data in the request body, in which format we are sending that request body data will be represented by using content type header. Content type header represents in which format consumer sending data to provider in the request body. Then what is accept header? Accept header is used to specify in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. So now when we are developing the REST API, we will support for multiple formats of data. So if we have two different consumers, one consumer want to deal with only XML data, another consumer want to deal with only JSON data. So that is possible. So we are going to support for both XML data and JSON data. JSON is by default. If you want XML, then you need to add that dependency extra. Good. Supporting for XML. To support for the XML, I have added one dependency. And here consumes and produces will be available. Consumes represents data format of the provider. Produces response body data. Accept represents in which format consumer expecting response from the provider. Content type represents in which format consumer sending data to provider in the request body. So a REST controller which supports for both XML data and JSON data. Look at this code. Anybody having any questions on this? You can unmute if you have any question on this one.
Hello, sir. What is the default accept type?
If you don't have XML dependency, then default will be JSON. If you add the XML dependency, default will be XML. It depends upon the dependency that you are adding.
Okay, we have both the dependency, then XML will be default.
XML is the default. Correct.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You are testing the APIs in Postman, so you are giving like accept header, those options. Then while we are connecting with the consumer application, how to connect, like how to set those options like accept header.
You can set the header. You can set the header. Suppose if you go for web client, so when we are developing a web client, so you have a method called header method will be available. When you go for REST template also, you have a option. You have a option to set the headers. The web client, we are having .get .uri method. Similarly, .header method will be available to set the header.
Okay. In current market, we are using only JSON, right?
Correct. The XML is outdated concept. Just for idea purpose, we discussed.
Okay.
But
Sir,
in the current market, we are using only JSON.
Yes. Are you going to cover validations in REST API?
What validation?
Validations like for inputs, like for email, we get like validations to give in a correct pattern.
Manual validation that we need to do. Okay. We can see
okay.
that.
Okay, we have in the course, right?
Yeah. Any other questions, anyone, guys?
Sir, actually, when we are sending XML, the received XML is as per expectation or not, we can check it using XSD. So in case of JSON, how can we do that? The
Sir,
input
for the
JSON.
JSON, there is no schema validation for the JSON, sir. That's a manual validation that you need to do.
Okay. Mhm.
For XML, schema is available, but for the JSON, there is no schema.
Mm.
Hello. Hi. Good morning, sir. Bhaskar.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, sir. And real time, how to use a producer application and a consumer application?
We already developed IRCTs and we deployed in the cloud, and we developed Make My Trip and we access in the real time also. Same process will be there.
That is the best example of producer and consumer application.
Yes, right. Same way. We already did that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Sir, can we ignore some XML tags from the response, sir? If suppose JSON we can ignore, right? Like that XML also possible, sir?
Yeah, it's possible. At the rate transient annotation will be available for that.
Transient annotation. Okay.
Yeah.
I will check, sir. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yep.
So what is Jakarta and JAX-RS?
Sir, Jakarta JAX-RS, that is a API given by Sun Microsystem. When the Spring was not there, people used it to develop the REST API by using JAX-RS API. Now, people are using Spring Web module, WebMVC module to develop the REST API. So JAX-RS API is the first approach to develop REST APIs in the Java. That is old approach.
Okay, sir.
When the Spring WebMVC was not there, people used it to go for that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, in Spring 2.x also, just we need to add the dependency to convert the
Yes, sir.
XML.
If you add this
Right.
dependency, that is sufficient. You don't need
Yeah.
to write any annotations for that. So we
Okay.
have seen that, right? When I add this dependency, now my
Yeah.
REST API is able to take XML as an input and it is able to provide XML as a output. Consumes
Okay.
and produces for both, it is supporting for that.
Okay.
Suppose-
Earlier we used annotation.
Earlier we need to write the annotation separately, that is binding class annotation, but now if you add this dependency, that's not required.
Okay. Yeah, 2.6 also support the same.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
So fine, guys. So with this, what we learned so far in the REST API, right? So I have updated that yesterday's topic notes and today's topic notes also. Yesterday we discussed about exception handling in the REST API. In the today's session, we learned how to deal with XML data in the REST API. So here you need to remember 4 concepts which are important. One is consumes, another one is produces. Consumes represents input data format of provider. That means in which format consumer can take the input data. So consumes you can specify as XML or JSON. Produces represents data format of a provider. In the response, in which format the provider can give the response. Accept represents in which format consumer expecting the response from the provider. Okay, and content type. So don't get confused. So consumes, produces, accept, content type. So these headers are important. When we are accessing one application from the another application by using this HTTP request, so we are going to send these HTTP headers. One is accept header, another one is content type header. The accept header will be representing in which format consumer expecting the response. Okay, then content type header represents in which format consumer sending data to the provider. So this example also I have given one post request method which is consuming XML and JSON data and producing text data. And here I have taken one get request method which is only producing XML or JSON. It is not taking any input. Okay, FIAN client will be covered as part of microservices case. Now, so this is the part that we learned in the REST API so far. So here, what we learned as part of our REST API concepts. We discussed about distributed application development, API architecture, interoperability, JSON, Jackson, HTTP protocol, REST controllers, REST API methods, what is query parameter, what is path variable, what is request body, what is consumes and produces, how to test API using Postman, and what is the Swagger. Then we learned IRCTC API development, Make My Trip application development, booking the tickets, Make My Trip app development, and we discussed about what is REST template, and we discussed about what is web client. REST template is used to send requests from one application to another application. It supports synchronous communication. Web client also used to send the request from one application to another application, whereas web client supports for both synchronous as well as asynchronous communication. Then after we discussed about exception handling in the REST API. Exception handling in the REST API. Then today we understood working with XML data. Working with XML data in REST API. So by default, the XML data is not supported in the REST API. We need to add one dependency. Then we can consume XML and we can produce XML. So here, two important points. One is accept header and another one is content type headers, right? Accept header will represent in which format consumer is expecting the response from the provider. Content type header represents in which format consumer sending the data to the provider. But XML we are not using nowadays in the market, guys. Just for our knowledge purpose, we discussed this XML concept. But in the real time, every provider and consumer dealing with every provider and consumer is dealing with JSON data only. Okay. Marshalling, unmarshalling. Anil Kumar. Converting Java object to XML is called marshalling, and converting XML to Java is called as unmarshalling. So the process of converting Java to XML, XML to Java, marshalling and unmarshalling concept. Now here, when I send accept is equal to XML, this Java object is converted to XML and we are getting the XML response, right? So that is called marshalling. Internally, marshalling is happening and the Java object is converted to XML format. When I send the post request with the XML data, this XML is converted to Java object, which is called unmarshalling. Internally, Boot is taking care of that marshalling and unmarshalling when we add this dependency for the XML. Are you guys clear?
Yeah, hi, sir. I have one query. For updating the record, you can use post mapping, right? Or why you go for put mapping?
So that is the industry standard, sir. HTTP protocol has given some recommendations. Post mapping method you can use to insert the data. Put mapping method you need to use to update the data. I already told in the previous sessions. Inside the post mapping also you can update the data, you can delete the data, but it is not the industry standard. Okay. So
Okay,
if you write the post mapping, if you write post mapping method with updating the logic, right? So everybody who is using HTTP protocol, they will think post mapping means inserting, put means update. But if you don't follow that standard, people will get confused. You got my point?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
What is content negotiation?
So content negotiation, nothing but conversions only, data conversion. So we need to support for input and output as per the consumer choice. So consumer can send XML as input, consumer can send JSON as input, consumer can expect XML as output, consumer can expect JSON as output. It depends upon the consumer. That is content negotiation.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Sir, can we learn the relational mapping in our syllabus, sir?
Yes, sir. It is part of our Spring Boot microservices. I will cover that topic. It is pending.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, in real-time project, whether they'll use web client or fin client, sir?
Sir, if you are using for inter-service communication, FIAN client topic is part of microservices. It is Spring Cloud concept. Once I explain the FIAN client, then I will tell you when to go for web client, when to go for FIAN client. Currently, we know REST template and web client. We don't know about FIAN client. Okay. So in the future, we are going to learn the FIAN client. At that time, I will tell you when to use web client, when to use FIAN client.
Sir, it is mandatory to keep content type in Postman, otherwise we won't get response.
It's not mandatory, sir. By default, Postman will take care of that. So if you set the data here, if you need to set that, if you set it as JSON, then it will take that content type as a JSON. It depends upon what option you are selecting here. Based on that, it will choose what is the content type.
Same with the accept header.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But accept header will not come by default. Accept header you need to set manually, because Postman will not know that in which format you are expecting the response. You need to set that accept header.
Then response won't come if we didn't set accept.
If you don't set that, default response will come. So in which format you are expecting, that may not come. Maybe they will give JSON as a default in the Postman. If you want XML, then definitely you need to send the accept header with the XML. Then only provider will understand that you are expecting XML response.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, cool. Good, guys. So please do the practice. We'll meet again on Monday. So in the Monday, we'll continue. Thank you. Happy weekend.